Turkey, Greece. Oh shit! Didn't they just show stuff with the Greece guy? You shouldn't be. You must be shitting me. Wasn't that guy dressed up in with the...
Yep.
Bro, this... The guy was wearing the Greece the way he was, like, and then dressed in blue. Oh my goodness.
They don't miss a beat. They do not.
Says water is the source of all life. Without no one can survive. But at the same time, that unevenly distributed on our planet. Governments cannot properly manage the water. It will scare natural resources as a primary social financial resource. Water has the power to destroy and to create. Figures of water loss are stagnant within the 7 years from 2003 to 2010. Parts of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran lost 144 cubic kilometers stored fresh water. 2 billion people live in areas where drinking water is constantly reduced, while the number is exposed to rise 5 billion by 2025. Huh? This shit is on point. I don't know who's putting this stuff, but this shit is on point. This is crazy. This is so Turkey, Iraq, Iran lost. So I think there's spot. Wow, there's the okay. So it says reduce while the number is expected to rise to 5 billion by 2025. The drought would aggravate the observed global warming. Another event that they're trying to. Okay, unfortunately, is expected to intensify in the coming years. Already estimated to have. And from wars, dramatically and data of NASA. If it shows this problem, experts warn the modern world would be jeopardized because of water scarcity. That's why governments must fight and cooperate to protect water resources and present is significant for the world. This has got a lot of stuff in there. Let me see. Introduction, NORA Global Research. It was to highlight the inappropriate of water for survival of modern world, to present the causes of international disputes, and also the aim of work. It is to describe the wars that have taken place, prevented today, highlight and need for the need for proper management of water, and is understood. The study tries to be useful tool to enrich literature reflection, water conflict, and the need to prevent the reduction of water. And the study let me see, it's got a study, let me see anything interesting in here. This is interesting. Oh yeah, and it says, by analyzing the importance of sanitation water supplies. Hold on, let me read a little bit above. Let me see. The significance of water is presented so that everyone can understand how important the water is. Also, the research studies that the role of water in natural environment, social, financial resources in 1/3 chapter, that the problem of reduction of water resources is presented as evaluated. The problem can be understood by analyzing the importance of sanitation water supply, describing, explaining, evaluating the risk of reduction of water resources, economic, political, and diplomatic causes of water conflict. So we know they got Europe. I need to write all this down because this is just funny. This basically connects like all this mumbo jumbo.
This is really cool.
don't have 30-year fixed, on a lot of the debt that they use to finance things.
So this is an argument that I've heard about a lot of these corporate buyers, like Blackstone, whatever. I know I said BlackRock before because I think that was said before, but I don't care, whatever they're called. You guys can all correct me, but it's that they miscalculated in what they started to like buy up during COVID, and they're going to pay the price. And I'm not saying that what you just said is reflective of that, like in totality, but is what you're saying that they are going to, like, what it is that they've done is going to create a consequence for them that might mitigate some of the things that people are dealing with now, or?
It was just kind of adding to this issue that people brought up before, like, about like what are the different components of why landlords raise rents. And obviously there's energy and there's other things, but there's interest costs too, because most of them use borrowed money, and most of them
Well,
don't.
no, I hear you, but like, so let's say you've got somebody like you have, let's say you have 10 units, right? And you have a bunch of people in your neighborhood, or a bunch of units in your neighborhood that are owned by Blackstone, and they're having to deal with what you're pointing out, which is fluctuating interest rates that are fucking them over. But you've owned your property, the interest rate's set at a really low rate. You can undercut this, right? So this is a problem for them. Am I wrong?
The problem for Blackstone, yeah.
Exactly. So one of the questions I asked Mrs. Shawnee in the like start of this conversation was saturation of these corporate buyers in like the most predominant markets. Like, because I asked her if she knew like what was the highest rate of saturation. I didn't put it in those terms, but basically like what markets have the most impact by the BlackRocks, I think she said BlackRock, but you guys are saying Blackstone, whatever.
There's a BlackRock, there's a BlackRock, and there is a Blackstone.
Well, fair enough. Let's just say the corporate entities. But is there what do we think the saturation is in the major markets? Like, is it? Because I've heard people argue that it's not large enough to have the kinds of long-term outcomes that people are fearing, and I've heard other people say opposite. Like, from your point of view, do you think that people owning it?
I think in certain markets, they absolutely impact the markets for single-family homes. It depends on the market. Absolutely, in certain markets. One thing everyone loses sight of, though, not to say that these are good guys, they're not. I mean, they're not bad guys, but they're for-profit enterprise, whatever. Okay, but people forget in 2008, 2009, these institutional buyers were the only bids. Okay. You're lucky you actually had them. They helped clean up the mess, okay? And then they decided, after they saw this, they said, hey, this is a good bit. These were businesses they were never in before. So when they got in them, all of a sudden they were doing very well with them. They said, hey, this is a good business. We should buy more, okay? That's how they got in it. But let me tell you that in the depths of the housing crisis, they were a welcome relief, really, for the whole country. And maybe now it's gotten out of hand, but, no, but nonetheless, at one point, they were. It's hard to argue that they were a bad thing.
If anybody else wants to jump in this, please do.
So I actually do think that it's not the numbers.
Wait, really quickly, Nicholas, let Andre jump in because he's trying to.
Hold on, I just wanted to ask a quick question. I think there is actual statistics about the breakdown.
Andre, we missed the first half of what you said. If you could just repeat.
I was saying, are you looking into single family rental house market, because there is actual statistics.
Okay, so let me frame this for all the people who weren't in here when this conversation started. So the conversation is kind of hinging on the annual rental increase cap that Biden has proposed. So it's a matter, like, I was trying to look up the specifics of who it applies to, but we got into a conversation and I didn't. So it's a matter of, so it's been referred to as a corporate price increase cap. And in the article pinned at the top, it says that it is limited to the ownership of 50 units. And so at first I thought that meant like in one building, right? Like a 50 unit plus building. And someone else brought up that would likely mean that it's one entity that owns 50 units. It doesn't matter if it's in one building or not. So we don't know specifically which it is, but I think that
It's the latter.
I think that Yeah, I was gonna say that makes more sense when it comes to the corporate buyers, so let's just assume that that's the case, and Ken's confirmed that, so. That's what we're talking about, it's less about the other ways in which, the market is impacted. For, home buyers, for like, single home renters, whatever.
Kelly, can I help?
So the original point of the conversation was to discuss whether or not, in the same vein as changes to the Supreme Court, to paying off student loans, to reparations, all the ways that in recent elections people have been able to garner like support to get people to the polls. Is Biden is this just like what I actually think that his perspective on the Supreme Court and putting term limits on, like, all of this is hogwash. I think it's a matter of energizing voters because voters have faith, especially when it's their own party that's telling them things. I think that this claim from Biden is very much in line with that it's something that's meant to energize voters. But I also think that people who hear this claim, who hear him talk about this, if they go back and they understand where these proposals come from, that they are scared for what it would mean if this kind of thing would be passed. It doesn't seem likely that it would be passed, but it doesn't mean that there, in reality, if it were, that there aren't like long-term really negative impacts because of the origin of this kind of idea, where it comes from, and all the things that are also part of it. Because I've said this before, but I didn't go into detail. But if you look at the article pinned, actually, I think it's an article in the chat. I need to repin it, or excuse me, paste it. But there's a thing called the Renters' Bill of Rights, which is what this is a part of. And people think that if he is able to get any kind of momentum behind this, that regardless of how much he says that this is a short-term fix or a short-term like adjustment to helping people deal with the costs of housing, that this is the same thing that was introduced in New York, and within 3 decades, the legislature around this had expanded, and it like had really negative, destructive impacts to their housing market. And the same thing can happen to America, and I think it's a fair criticism. So I will pin the article that is in opposition to the one pinned at the top. Excuse me, I won't pin it. I'll paste it in the chat again. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to see if I can answer one of the questions that you asked, which is like how much of an impact it would have on the mega corporations, gauging by how much of the market they have cornered. Now, before I do it, I would like to ask Ken one question. So single-family rentals would include apartments as well as houses, correct? Is that correct?
Well, single-family rental is a single-family rental. They're not an apartment building. An apartment building is technically a multiple dwelling. Okay, I'm assuming from the legislation that Biden is most interested, because this is what a lot of publicity is over, are these institutional landlords that own a lot of single-family homes. I mean, I guess you could apply them to multiple dwellings. I think that was mostly to deal with the single-family homes. And when he talks about 50 units, he's not talking about a 50-unit apartment building somewhere. He's talking about you own 50 single-family homes, because that's not, that's kind of not normal, right? That's only like, an institutional buyer would have that.
So it's not really only institutional though, Ken. I mean, there's a lot of people that went into that business. In our area, after the crash, there were a lot of, and they're not huge companies. I mean, I know so many companies that went in and they own 50 to 150 homes, and they rehab them. And these were homes that also, when everything went belly up, people tore out the entire kitchen and the plumbing and the piping to try to salvage whatever money they could. And so you had a lot of these companies, smaller companies, that came in and bought up the houses through foreclosure sales, but really had to almost build the inside from scratch because the houses were decimated by the borrowers. And I don't see them as all, they're not all, I just want to say this because and Ken was talking about this, in our area, these companies saved our butts, and they saved our city. and they weren't all BlackRock and, you know, huge companies. Some of them were smaller operators. They could come in and own part of a neighborhood at a very, at a fraction of what it originally sold for, but they also had their work in front of them because they had to, you know, these weren't just picking up a house on foreclosure that some family nicely moved out of. It was a lot more involved in the acquisition of the property.
Okay, so
Before you go on,
Okay, actually, hold on, guys. I actually have something more. So we're running up on the 12 hours of this room. I don't know when it was started, but it's showing it was 12 hours in my notifications. I know Jason starts these like on the hour or the half hour. So we're gonna have to end this like in less than 15 minutes to try and make sure that we mitigate the reality of whatever that is. So Ken, go ahead, but I just wanna give everyone that warning. We're just gonna say 10 minutes.
Abby, everything Abby said was right about like where we live, okay? Except Abby, the one thing I want to make to you, yes, they were smaller entities. You could still though be classified as institutional and not be BlackRock.
Yeah, but I was trying to use institutional as not what people are assuming is huge public companies.
Oh, yeah.
Or big private equity. I mean, these were smaller operators. I mean, there's so many of them that did this.
I know, yeah.
So before we go down that, you know, rabbit hole, I just want to read. So this statistic actually will be, I think, helpful to answer Kelly's question before that. So the biggest landlords of single-family rental houses and multifamily apartments. Who owns the U.S. housing stock? I'm going to post this in the chat. It's from April 2024.
You can pin it if you want. I think it's fine to.
Yeah. 80% of single-family rentals are mom and pop. Mega landlords, which is the companies that are questioned, like, you know, BlackRock and whatnot, own just 3% of the market. So, you know, what Abby is talking about, like the difference between mom and pop and the mega landlords probably would qualify for medium-size landlord, you know, companies. And in another quick statistic, there are 146 million housing units in the U.S. 91% are occupied and only 9% are vacant, so they're up for rent. It's very true what he's saying, and thank you for having the statistics on that, because I do know that, for instance, Goldman tried to get into that business when they invested in some different funds of companies that were going in and picking up, you know, a lot of houses at one time through this whole foreclosure environment, but they got out of that business. So I mean, I know specifically for that company, they got out, and then the private funds went in a different direction, more so with apartment dwelling, but definitely out of the single family.
So I'm just gonna say one last thing before I go. So I do think that this is transitory, to be honest. I think that, like, for example, like the private equity firms that are down here, like, they're gonna have to adjust the pricing, because really what is, so Florida's booming, right? People are moving here. The other part of the state that is losing population is Miami. Why? Because it's gotten too expensive, and basically the poors are getting shoved out of the city, which is fine, because the average wealth of the city is going up as we shove the poor people out to Broward. But realistically, there's not enough jobs to sustain these price points in this area that pay these salaries. Like, this is not New York City. So I think eventually what you're going to see is, like, okay, we're going to hit the top of the bubble. They're going to realize, oh shit, our apartments are empty because the poors are getting pushed out. And then they're going to have to adjust the price to where people can actually afford them, right? Or find other ways to bring other buyers from international or whatever. But I think this is the reality of it. Like, you don't need to live in a luxury or tower with a rooftop hot tub like I have here. Like, these are all luxuries. It's, you know, eventually people will adjust, or you will move to an area you can actually afford. If you can't afford $3,500 a month in a rental apartment or whatever.
Nicholas,
But anyways,
I have a question.
that's all I have
Is
to say.
that Kendall, like the parts of Miami that Homestead or Kendall, I mean, aren't they all still single family and not for luxury?
Those are single family, but like the areas that are actually expensive is like downtown, Miami Beach, Brickell, and those are the areas that are like primarily invested on by like the larger investors. Like the largest investors are not going to buy like renting out in fucking Homestead. That's like 40 minutes away. I mean, that's a great area if you have a family, but like that's not really where like people are really moving to. I mean, sure, some people will like it, but most people are not moving there. But I guess to my point, people will just keep leaving if the prices stay where they're at because you can't afford it, right? And I think that's the reality of America. You just gotta make more money, and then you won't have problems. Fuck the poor.
It's my
Really quickly,
they've got the
really-
people willing
Just
to
a
move there.
really,
They've got-
hold on one sec, just really quick, this will be fast, matter of housekeeping. As we get closer to that 10-minute mark, which we're about like 6 minutes away, I'm gonna go open a room and send the link to Andre. He's gonna post it at the top so that we can continue the conversation. So just everyone pay attention to that for those of you who wanna cross over into that room, by all means. But this will definitely end like in 5, 6 minutes, but go ahead, or
I was just gonna say that, the people in South Florida, they were spoiled because prices here were very low considering where they were living. The people coming from elsewhere, Chicago, Minneapolis, Detroit, you name it, any big city, they had their condos in the city. They were coming down here and finding out what they could buy here. They started paying well over asking, and to them, it was worth it. And so what does that tell you? It's not overpriced. The market dictates what stuff goes for. That's for rent, that's for everything. And as long as consumers are paying it, guess what? It's not overpriced. And anybody with a brain in their head is going to say, okay, wait a minute. As that building ages, we all know the freaking costs are through the roof. So they're going to make the money while they can, and they're going to keep raising rents. And as long as people keep paying it, me included, guess what? They're going to keep raising the prices, and that's our own damn fault. There's places that are cheaper. There's places that are cheaper down in Miami, but nope, they want to live in those buildings, in those neighborhoods. And guess what? If you want to live here, you're going to pay a premium. People now, you don't get a park for free. It's $150, $250 a month. And so people can pout about it, but the fact is Miami isn't that inflated. Go look at elsewhere. We're just finally catching up to the rest of the world.
You also
Yeah,
don't have tax,
It's
Corey.
factually
You
inaccurate.
don't
So I
have
just googled
tax,
it.
right?
Prices in Broward are 9% down in the year. Prices in Miami are already 7% down. Like, this bubble is not going to continue forever. People will just leave. You cannot have New York-based salaries in a city that the pay bands are much smaller. People literally cannot afford it. Based on what we don't make New York salaries, we don't make LA salaries. If you look at the amount that people are spending compared to the average salary in this county, it is about 30 to 40% lower than what they're paying in Los Angeles for a similar priced apartment. People will just leave, and that will go. I think Holly has a point in the chat. As those people leave because they're like, fuck this, prices will come back down. They're already going down. So you can just Google it. Literally, prices are down in Miami 8%.
A 100%. It's now a buyer's market. There's of course few pocket neighborhoods that are excluded, but a broad stroke across the board, the trajectory has been down and it is continued down for a little bit more of a correction.
I think didn't the same thing happen in Austin? Like, Austin is down like 20%. It's like a crazy drop over the last couple months. So I just think that we had the boom towns of the pandemic, and then I think even like as prices continue to drop, it will normalize. I think it's transitory, to be honest. Give it a couple of years, it's just. Anyways, I gotta go to bed. Good night, y'all.
Yeah, Nicholas.
So looking now, that's showing 1.6 on all homes overall, at a 6% increase year over year from May of last year to May of this year for houses in Miami. So, I mean, we could look at all kinds of different stats. We look at these all the time. What I can tell you is this is what I do, that not all homes are going up. Not all neighborhoods are going up. But overall, it's a 6% year over year. Now, that's slow for Miami. That's slow compared to what we had. And yeah, a lot of it was transitory. I mean, you had a lot of people moving in down here. Right now, we had a shift. Columbia had been the #1 market coming into South Florida. Germany just overtook that. There is a shift, and those things are going to happen. But we still have a ton of people moving into the area. Yes. Guess what? We put houses on. We come up and we say, "Oh, your house is worth 158." They go, "Well, let's put it on for 168." Okay, cool. They're not getting that. They are sitting on the market longer. From a year ago to this year, probably about 15 days longer. A buyer gets a chance to actually do their due diligence on a house rather than overpaying and not getting ask for certain things. But this narrative that the pricing is coming down, that's not reality. I mean, there's certain neighborhoods where, yeah, you'll see a price dip. But if you're in a good location, you got a nice home. My home that's on the bay in Biscayne Bay that I'm trying to sell, that one's not dropping. That one's still going up. So I mean, the one right next to it just sold for 10 million.
There's pocket
Ladies
neighborhoods.
and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, if
Can
you,
Can I just wrap something up real quick?
well, Cindy, we're gonna continue this conversation, so I want you guys to continue contributing. I just posted the link that Kelly opened the room.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Just go, everybody go there. I'm gonna be closing the room in literally like 1 minute, half a minute or so. So please click on the link that Kelly posted up there. All right, maybe another 10 seconds. Okay, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Number two, come out. You're finally coming out. We know. Finally coming out. Two transgender speech yard. That ain't fake. How was that fake?
That's fake, bro.
How was that fake?
That's fake.
How was that fake? Cause you're finally coming out. How is that fake? You're finally coming out.
Man, why you lying on me? Y'all really want to like that?
You said something to me.
Tato, send that in the telegram, Tato.
How did I make that?
Put that in that telegram, Tato.
Yeah, you finna go viral, little bitch. You should have said shit to me.
Entirely different. And by the way, where there are state Supreme Courts that have appointed justices that have gone through a vetting process, which elected ones don't go through that same vetting process, there are considered better state Supreme Courts with respect to the reliance on their decisions and non-reversal of their decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court. Best example is the difference between Pennsylvania and New Jersey, two states right next to each other. One is an elected Supreme Court that has had contested races, and the other is the New Jersey Supreme Court, which is appointed by the governor and vetted. The New Jersey Supreme Court is considered one of the best state Supreme Courts and has been relied upon and cited by the U.S. Supreme Court. And so I just needed to address that comment in the chat. And yes, in my state, we've had some contested Supreme Court races.
Yeah, but Robert was actually saying, he didn't believe that, it was implied in his comments, that enough judges followed his type of lead in showing self-restraint. Okay, in fact, if you look at the Supreme Court ruling that legalized gay marriage, I think he did it to a dicta or dictum, whatever that term is. I don't think it was part of his dissent. But he basically said, who do we think we are? Okay, so what he was saying was not necessarily his personal view on gay marriage. He was basically saying, this is not the role of the Supreme Court. He probably thought it should be left to the states. Okay, but this is, and that really is kind of more to the point, that there's a long history of most judges not policing themselves on a lot of these types of decisions and saying, you know what, I may disagree. I mean, it's what Robert Bork used to say, and everybody hated him for whatever reason, but Robert Bork used to say that Congress could pass a stupid law. I can think it's stupid, that doesn't make it unconstitutional. But we have more judges now who basically, if they see a law that they don't like, whether, it used to be just the liberals used to do this, then the conservatives started doing it because they saw all the liberals doing it. And now you've got both liberal judges and conservatives, some mostly conservative judges, doing it, basically finding rationales to strike down laws that they don't like, that they would vote against if they were members of the legislature. So, I don't think there's the self-restraint that there needs to be with judges anymore. So
But you have political influence if you're going to try to enforce a code of conduct that leads to all kinds of accusations of political interference with the judiciary, and ethical decisions can be, I think it makes it very political.
But we have to just, we have
And
this sort of ethics.
it erodes the public trust. I'm sorry, Ken, I disagree with you.
I know, I
And
understand.
it had no problem self-policing. It's like all of a sudden, the Supreme Court is being attacked, exactly what Kelly was saying, because he didn't like the friggin' decision. And then we're hearing all about justices that were put on that were supposedly, what was that lady saying the other night in the room, that were packing or stacking because they were 3 conservative justices. Well, I'm sorry, Clinton put on 2 liberal justices, and Obama put on 2 liberal justices, and Biden put on a liberal justice. That's how it works. It's always worked that way. And these justices don't always rule conservative and liberal. Gorsuch has swung all different ways on this. So has Amy Coney Barrett has ruled sometimes with the liberals. It's ridiculous. And I think that when we were in the room talking about stop and frisk, that Terry case that we were talking about, the majority opinion was written by the Chief Justice that was a liberal court. So they can go different ways. I mean, that comes from being on the bench for years and being seasoned, not forcing them off because someone doesn't like the way decisions are. The decisions are going with the temperament of the country. I really struggle with this. It's so important that the Supreme Court stays independent.
But Abby,
And doesn't
the
feel this
appellate division, the Court of Appeals, they have an ethics code, and they have lifetime appointments, right? They still have an ethics code. You know, I mean, do you think the ethics code for the Court of Appeals, you know, has limited their judicial independence? Because they have.
No, because it was promulgated by the judiciary itself, right? The ability to rein that stuff in is given as a power to the Chief Justice. Ken, if you're asking, should there be some rule against accepting lots of lavish gifts? I go back to the remedy in the Constitution. If the Congress truly dislikes and is truly disgusted by the behavior, then they can impeach the justice. We shouldn't be looking for an easier route simply because we don't want to have the fight of impeachment. It's going to be slow.
Is inherently a political process. You make it more political if you go the impeachment route. Then if you have,
I don't necessarily
then
think
if you had a
that. The
clear set of
founders
lines.
gave us. I don't necessarily think that. The founders gave us a mechanism to solve this problem, and the mechanism is impeachment, right? So that if Congress feels that strongly, they can act on their own prerogatives. Until then, the court should be able to remain independent.
Again, because it's an unpopular decision to one party, all of a sudden there's a need to revamp the entire court. And it's exactly what Marshall was saying, or whoever said it before. It's the Kelly said, it's the filibuster. It'll bite him in the ass. It's Harry Reid not letting go of it, and then look at what happened to him. So it's the same thing. And there's going to be opinions that are not popular with a particular political party. It's just the way it goes.
Roger, go ahead. Well, if he doesn't want to go, I don't think this is a. Go ahead.
What was the question?
No, I just said go ahead because you had your hand raised.
Oh, yeah, I'm used to raising my hand to speak. But anyways, I actually agree with Abby about this. Look, neither side is picking justices that I like. Every once in a while they accidentally get it wrong, but that's just the way it works, you know? That's the way the cookie crumbles. I will say that for the most part, I think that the courts are the most functional part of the government. The one part I would push back on, Abby, though, is the idea that the courts are not political. I mean, the fact that they are the third branch of government makes them, by definition, political. They try to be, as non-biased as possible, but that's not possible, which is why, we get the decisions that we get. And I think it's okay to accept that, because usually, when things time out, I like to think of it as timing out of these positions. It just the ball rolls where it rolls. If you're the conservative quote unquote president or the progressive quote unquote president, and somebody dies on your watch or retires on your watch, you get to name the justice. And there's a whole process for approval and yada, yada, yada. And as Marshall mentioned, there's a process for getting rid of people. The processes are already in place. I think, the courts are, not perfect, but in comparison to the body that make our shitty laws and the executive branch that, signs these shitty laws into law, I think that, you got to give it to the courts on most things. But there's some notable areas where they're just totally wrong. I mean, back when, FDR thought it was cool to put innocent Japanese people in internment camps, and the Supreme Court said, yeah, yippee, let's go do it. The Japanese people are going to make us unsafe. I fear that we could have similar rulings like that in the future, depending on who the boogeyman might be. Because there are some people that think that safety is more important than freedom, and those people are wrong, and I wish those people wouldn't be on the Supreme Court.
I think that this is not about any decision. This is about Clarence Thomas. This is about people not recusing themselves when they should. This is about the integrity of the court. And I think that, the court actually made it quite easy for any legislator or anyone to, push this agenda. And Biden is just following through with the notion that the American public has never had less trust in the Supreme Court. I mean, so it makes sense to me, timing-wise.
Doesn't make any sense to me. Nothing's been proven. You don't have any proof that there was an influence peddling. And if there was proof of it, the court can self-police. And it's Clarence Thomas, you probably dislike everything about him, and every decision he ever ruled on, is a Yale Law graduate. He's a very bright man. You may not like any of his opinions, his dissents, but they didn't put a buffoon on the court. And, there's no proof that a decision went a different way than it would have gone because of some influence peddling. I mean, until that's actually tried and proven, it's an accusation. And then you have to look at all the actions of all the justices and where all the justices over the years went on vacations, who they hung with, who did Ruth Bader Ginsburg go hang out with, who'd she have dinners with, who were her friends, you open up such a Pandora's box with it, and I totally disagree. I think this is a political motivation, and what Roger was saying, Roger, we are really agreeing, because I think when someone gets appointed and they know there's no more political agenda, now they're free to rule as a jurist and to be an originalist, to look at the Constitution, and they don't have political winds blowing. They can rule objectively without any political pressure on them. Yes, maybe they got there politically, but that was my point. You have conservative justices that have ruled liberally in cases since these three justices came on the bench. You have Gorsuch that has sided with the liberals, I think, on the taking, some of the taking cases. So that's the point. They can go in different directions. You had a liberal justice rule that it's okay for stop and frisk and wrote the opinion. That's the independence of the court, and you're taking that away from them. And I think that's wrong.
Do you think that there's any proof that they lied during their confirmation hearings? The ones who did a 180?
I don't know. Ketanji Brown, does she know what a woman is or doesn't know what a woman? I don't know if she was lying, if she really knows what a woman is, or I don't know if it was bullshit what she was saying. What do you think?
Her name is
Ketanji Brown.
I can't, sorry, it's my silly accent.
Hold on just a second. So Madison, I think this is a good question. And I think that people ask it around people who aren't able to answer it in the kind of context that's worthwhile. But I've heard some people answer it in some kind of a context that I think is important. So I'll try to channel these responses because they make a lot of sense to me. In the same way that, for instance, Ketanji Brown Jackson couldn't answer the question of what is a woman, and I think it was fair because when it comes to matters of law, what a definition is has meaning, and in the same ways that if she were to be asked any kind of question that could in fact have something currently in front of the court, she'd be limited the way that she could answer it. And any kind of a question that doesn't at this point, but may in the future have some sort of a decision in front of the court, she certainly can't answer in that context. She can answer in the context that she has available to her. I think that that's how these justices answered. The cases that they were presented with after the fact, they weren't in front of the court. They were not national news. They weren't a matter of something that could be commented on all the time. And so for them to say that it was, I can't remember the wording, but basically unchallenged law, settled law, I don't understand how that would be considered to be a lie, because that is what it was up until the point that it wasn't anymore. And I don't think that we would want any court justice to answer a question in that kind of an interview that basically is meaningless, because until a case comes before the court, in the world is any justice supposed to answer questions about whatever issue might be implicated by that case? How are they meant to answer questions about any kind of future decisions? Like, they can't. Like, this is in the future. You're asking them to predict the future. And I also don't understand how these questions were. The reality of the fact that these questions were asked in the first place, I think, says a lot about how some people felt about the decision in Roe. If there was no issue with what that law rested on, why would anyone be asking that question? Like, how many other questions were asked about settled law? Like, I think that there's some obvious things that we have to contend with, and using their answers to this particular question that you're pointing out, it seems foolish to me, because it wouldn't have been asked in the first place if there wasn't a question around that decision. You know that they can't answer questions based on a case that they wouldn't be privy to, because they're not on the Supreme Court. It's not a matter of public understanding, so they wouldn't be able to respond to it anyways. And even if they had information about any of those things, they wouldn't be able to tell anybody else before a decision came out, or they likely wouldn't. I guess the rules about what they can or can't say, or, I'm not so sure what they are, but like, it's foolish that people would say that they lied. Like, I don't understand how it is that, like, that's a lie for them to say that it's settled, when at that moment in time, like, there wasn't anything upending it. Does that make sense? Like, I think that this is like a real crutch that is meaningless, but people fall for it and they believe in it, because why not? People that want to think that legislating from the bench is okay, they're not going to accept the fact that there was a problem with Roe versus Wade, and they're not going to acknowledge what may have been corrected with Dobbs. They're going to focus on what you're absolutely right to say was like a thing that people had relied on that had some social upheaval. That's absolutely true. That did occur. But if you want to blame that on justices who were not dealing with the case that came later on, and you want to say that they somehow magically knew what was coming down the pike and they lied about it, I think that's bullshit. Because if you think that's bullshit, then you should say that Ketanji Brown Jackson was ridiculous for not answering the question about what's a woman. But I don't think she was ridiculous. I think for the same reason she answered that way, they answered the way that they did.
So, but I mean, Kelly, what you're missing in all of this, though, what everyone's missing, because most people aren't old enough to remember this, some of us are, that there used to be a time, pre Ginsburg, okay, when judicial nominees used to answer questions a lot more forthrightly. That ended with Robert Bork, because Robert Bork was probably one of the most qualified nominees that we ever had, who all of a sudden couldn't get confirmed to the Supreme Court despite being unanimously approved to be on the D.C. Circuit by a voice vote. He was a judicial scholar, much more than most of the people who end up on the Supreme Court. He was a law professor. He had written a lot, so his opinions on stuff was well known, because he had actually written books and stuff. Okay, and because when he was nominated for the Supreme Court, the Democrats said, "Oh, he's out of the mainstream," and even though they all voted for him for the D.C. Circuit, by the way. Okay. After Bork, it became kind of standard practice. If you want to be on the Supreme Court, don't write anything, don't be a law professor, don't have an opinion. This is where it is. The only one who got away with having any opinions was Ginsburg, and I think she was in a unique situation where she was able to do that. But other than Ginsburg, I will tell you that every judicial nominee, not just to the Supreme Court, but the lower courts too, basically it's now all bullshit. You have to believe that these people who went to all these prestigious law schools don't have a thought on a case that's been decided before. They don't have any opinions, okay? But they all want to be on the court, and that's because they can't get confirmed in our current political environment. That's the reality since Bork, okay? But you have to understand that how important the Bork nomination was to changing the way that we even ran these confirmation hearings and the way that judicial nominees answered questions. It literally changed with him. It's the most important thing I could really say about it.
That's totally fair. I mean, I can appreciate that, and I do understand that to be the case, and I know that things have changed. Which is why the comparison I made was with someone like Ketanji Brown Jackson.
No, you're right. It's the same thing. I mean, her response was ridiculous. I mean, but all the responses these days from the nominees, even from the lower courts, are ridiculous. But we're stuck with it now because of what happened with Robert Bork. There used to be a time when the only thing that the senators really concerned themselves with were judicial scholarship. You know, do you understand the laws? I mean, that's why it's interesting to watch Senator Kennedy interview some of these nominees for the lower courts, by the way, because Biden's nominating people who don't understand basic, like legal concepts like judicial estoppel. I mean, they can't even define it. Okay, but that's the way that we used to confirm judges. It's like you have like a basic understanding of what a judge does. Do you understand this injunction versus that injunction, whatever? This is where it is. Okay, and then it became something else. Post Bork. But I mean, look, and I'll tell you something else. Lindsey Graham, and he always said this. He was right. He doesn't do it anymore. Lindsey Graham voted for a whole bunch of Democratic nominees. Okay, for the courts. He voted for Sotomayor, not because he agreed with her, because his view of the role of the Senate at the time was it's the president's nomination. If the president nominates somebody who has the kind of like the minimum qualifications, the judicial scholarship, and they're qualified to be a judge, the fact that their philosophy is different than mine doesn't mean that I should reject them. But now that world has changed, okay? And now you have people getting rejected over their judicial philosophy, not about whether they're like skilled legal scholars.
So when you talk about I get it. Hold on. So Madison, listen, I absolutely asked you to like pull this up. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't. Oh, maybe she swiped out because she was about to speak. Well, she put in the chat. It was a simple question: will you overturn Roe versus Wade? Like, first of all, I don't see how that can be a question that like somebody can answer until they understand the matters of the court. Certainly until they, like, you can't answer that kind of question not knowing like what would be the reason for it to be overturned. As far as I remember, the question was, do you consider it settled law? And that's a different thing. Like, I can't imagine a world in which we would rely on people that we want to be members of the Supreme Court that feel obligated to answer a question like, will you overturn something, and then feel obligated to uphold that, a yes or no on that. Like, I wouldn't want that. That's like the height of politicization, in my opinion, and we already are struggling with that. So I don't know. I wish Madison was here because I would like to. I would just like to interrogate that like a tiny bit, but since she's not, I'll just let you go. Does anyone else remember that circumstance?
Yeah, I do. But and I see going forward where so many controversial decisions could be asked by a new possible justice, where they would go through confirmation hearings, and another case that represents something that one political side really wants back into law, it could be asked. And so these kinds of political case questions would just become the norm. And I 100% agree with you, Kelly. It then screws up that independence, or that perfect balance where they can come on with an independence to rule based on law and not based on a political position of a.
Okay, I will tell you this. I don't believe there's been a single Supreme Court nominee or federal judicial nominee, even for lower courts, in the last 40 years, that doesn't have a view of how they would actually rule on something like Roe v. Wade if they were on the Supreme Court and weren't subject to they wouldn't be on a lower court. You have to deal with precedent, but they all kind of know because these are they went to law school, they've read it, they all have opinions, but they know they can't share that opinion because if you share an opinion, you don't get confirmed.
But sure, that's true, Ken. I agree with you there, but it's also a matter of like, that's like saying, I think that could overturn it. Like, are you just meant to make up the circumstances by which you could overturn it? Like, that's why I remember the question not being, will you overturn Roe v. Wade?
But that particular issue, right, is kind of like, it's well known, it's well researched.
Ken, none of this, Ken, I hear you. Let me finish what I'm asking because you've got an opinion, but it's not based on the question I'm asking because you're not hearing it. My question has nothing to do with like whether or not it's possible that people were worried about that. I remember the question being literally like, is it a matter of settled law? That's what I remember the question being. I don't remember it. Like I don't know. I think that would have stood out. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're right. So basically, if you want to play the legal technicality, that they commit legal perjury, all that nonsense or whatever, but
But that no. Ken, your reality is different than what they're saying. They're saying they lied. Listen, I get that you understand where they're coming from. I don't care where they're coming from. I am addressing the statements they're making. I am not concerned with people being ridiculous, people being mentally unwell, and people being so partisan that they can't see beyond their own bullshit. I'm addressing the statement.
Okay, so here's my view. Like Susan Collins says that Kavanaugh misled her, because he was always talking about settled law. Well, she was an idiot, by the way, because you know what? I knew Kavanaugh would probably overturn Roe. I would have confirmed him anyway, even though I support Roe. But that's not really my point. Is that she knows how the game is played. She knows what this stuff is. If she was stupid enough to believe him, okay, she's a U.S. senator. This is where it is. Okay, she should have known better. If she wanted to vote against him because she was convinced he'd overturn Roe, and that was the reason she wanted to vote against him, that's what she should have done. Lisa Murkowski, I believe, did vote against him. Okay, this is where it is. Okay, she was just an idiot, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, but take any controversial issue. What if someone asked, would you overturn affirmative action? I mean, James, I think, put this in the chat. How do you know how you're going to answer that without the circumstances and the facts of a case that's before you that may have, it's what Kelly was just saying, may have a fact pattern that gives reason or cause that a precedent gets overturned? I mean, stare decisis is a really important legal principle in our system. It's rare that cases get overturned, but they do get overturned, or portions of a case can get overturned, and not an entire case. So let's say the question was about the affirmative action cases, and who knew that the Asians would bring the lawsuit that they brought, and who knew how that would then turn. So if you're going through the vetting process and you answer that question, and then subsequently 2 years later the case comes before you with a particular fact pattern that calls for a determination that is opposite of how you answered it to the Senate. But who knew how that fact pattern was going to be? I mean, it's projecting the future, and I think it's
I would
not
agree
a fair
with you on
question.
affirmative action now, because I think that's a very broad subject. I think on this specific case, what I was always looking for on abortion, like if somebody wanted to justify overturning it or something, was two things. Did realistically the period of viability change over that much over 30 or 40 years? And I'm not talking about an isolated case of one preemie here or one preemie there. Was there a significant enough change in medical science to change the viability window. And the other issue is, depending on where you stand on the legal issue, is what should even be a viability window, because a lot of the conservative justices believe that the court's overreached in even defining a viability window. So at that point, you would either have an opinion on whether you thought the court should even define a viability window, and so because those are the issues, because you kind of knew those are the issues that are coming before you, because those are all the cases. I mean, so I think the abortion issue is actually much more narrow than affirmative action in terms of the breadth of cases that could have been brought.
Maybe that's fair, but here's the thing, and this is why I think it's bullshit, and I think it's such a cop-out and such, like, unintellectual garbage for people to use these interviews and then to misstate what was said in them to make some sort of a case for someone having been a liar, or that their decision was motivated outside of how they read the Constitution, is that they wouldn't have asked that question if they didn't understand it to be commonly held that was a decision that people questioned, like, from when it was made. I mean, like, if they didn't feel like there was a reason to ask it, they wouldn't have asked it. And the fact that they asked it says everything about the possibility of it being overturned given the right court case. I mean, I think it's ridiculous not to acknowledge. I'm not saying that no one here is acknowledging that, but I'm just saying, like, when people act like all fucking butthurt and how they think the law has been contorted against them, the fact that they asked that question in the first place tells me that they should acknowledge that it was an absolute possibility based on the decision that was made.
I know Dr. Jordan, I don't believe because she's a religious Catholic. Scalia was more religious than her, so if you want to blame someone's religious convictions, I mean, I think that's really a baseless claim.
Well, I don't want to give Dr. Jordan the opportunity to talk about attractive women.
I'm not. I didn't come up with that. I mean,
Hold on. Dr. Jordan, save your horniness. You have some serious background noise. I don't know what's going on. You can inject your really active. Hold on. Listen, we're at kind of a lull. I want you to respond, but I'm going to interrupt the momentum of this to point out why this room was open in the first place, why I wanted to open it again. We were talking in a previous room about, I'm guessing a lot of you have heard this, so I'll keep it brief, about what Biden has suggested to be something to deal with the housing crisis in America, the increase, the housing crisis in terms of access and cost. It seems to be that people don't think that this is going to be a thing that will pass. And just this particular rent control piece of it, I'll put some articles in the chat. We all got kind of sidetracked. I was in some back channels talking, whatever. I'll put some articles in the chat that this is all based on. But there seems to be this thing called a renter's bill of rights, that this particular price cap for what people have referred to as corporate rents being capped. But this is like one aspect of this renter's bill of rights. Sorry. Anyways, and if in fact he were to have the momentum to pass this, people that think that that's possible, which there don't seem to be too many, say that this is problematic because all the other things in this renter's bill of rights would be pretty devastating to the housing market for both buyers and renters. The government control would cause chaos. It would have the kinds of impacts that we saw in places like New York and the rent control that they had. And an impact way beyond that, because it goes way beyond what happened in New York. This particular piece of it, though, is a matter of, I think the reason that it's called, or the reason people refer to it as corporate is because it's for people who have 50 plus units. And it's an annual increase of 5% plus. It's national, so it doesn't really take into account different markets. So imagine if you're in a place where you have the lowest rents in the country because the cost of living is low. Imagine how not very far that 5% is going to go in a year when you need to do repairs or any kind of a thing to a building, considering inflation with construction costs. But whatever. that's a matter of how we're going to talk about this. But anyways, my thoughts were when I saw this were just like his comments on what he wants to do in the Supreme Court, is that it's all bullshit and posturing. That he's just trying to invigorate a part of the voting populace that would likely vote for Harris that may have been lost through this last term, whether it be because of one reason or another, but maybe specifically through activism, like some of the more leftist parts of the coalition that generally come together behind Democrats. I think he's doing his best to shore them up. But I also think that this is just what people do, right? This is, even though he's not on the front of the ticket, maybe this was already, ready to go, and he's just doing Kamala a solid. God knows she probably needs it, whatever. But I don't think that there's any realistic expectation that this or an amendment to change the fucking Supreme Court is going to be passed. Like I said, if as he posed, the Supreme Court position today was based on abortion. If Democrats can't pass a bill to secure abortion rights for women in America, I'm not so sure why the fuck he thinks he can pass an amendment. But whatever. Either way, I think it is all bullshit. It's all statements trying to get votes, and at some point in time, this kind of manipulation, like bald-faced lying, it's going to have some kind of an impact. I'm curious what you guys think that it is. If you want to speak specifically to the rent control piece, I think that's awesome. If you want to speak specifically to how it is just a matter of trying to manipulate the voters, I think that's interesting.
So, should I go? I was just going to say that I have a crush on Amy Coney Barrett, and just like I had one on Sarah Palin. If she wants me to sleep under her bench or on top of the bench, whatever, I would comply. That being said, I didn't come up with anything that I said on my own. I mean, that's just consuming MSNBC and CNN forever. It's like mainstream media basically said that, this Notre Dame professor, they kind of predicted, well, I shouldn't say they predicted, they anticipated that she would vote on certain issues a certain way. And I mean, that's just the way the court has evolved, the high court has evolved. And so, I don't think I'm insinuating anything. That's just what was expected. And some of the things I probably might even agree with. But they said, they kind of implied she's going to vote a certain way, and it's kind of like it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck.
So Ketanji, I can't get her name out tonight. Brown Jackson. Thank you. You don't think there's an assumption she would rule certain ways? I mean, look at her dissent on the immunity case was just bizarre, her dissent, that he could send in a SEAL team. I mean, it is just ridiculous. I mean, there's so much I could say about that, but the point is, you don't think there was an anticipation on how she was going to rule on cases? You put a justice that has more liberal leanings and comes from a CRT background, you know exactly where she's going to go. So, what's the point?
Well, I guess it's just
what's your problem?
No, you're right. But what I'm saying is that consuming the news that I do, they're obviously going to make a much bigger deal about it on the other side with regard to certain issues, and so they did. And so it's hard to step away from that. I mean, I need to. I'm not joking when I say I need to watch. If I watch more Fox News, I would probably come away with it. They probably did the same thing with regard to her. So it's just that growing up, the high court to me was always this. I held it with such esteem. And when you watch the media today, they've really attacked the court. Now, maybe they're not right to do so, but they have, and it's hard to unsee those kinds of media commentaries.
Well, to zoom out a little bit from this particular thing, it doesn't mean we can't go right back to it, because one aspect of what I pointed out lends to this conversation and probably others in terms of promises made, promises never kept.
But yeah, voters keep voting. But anyways, do you guys, so when you have something that doesn't seem to have enough support, as I laid out, like, I'm not so sure how in the fuck we can imagine that an amendment gets passed when the excuse for that amendment is something that's a matter of just getting a bill passed. But not that I expect people to think rationally about this. Like, obviously, that's not what's happening. So do we think, though, that even if the path seems pretty difficult, are we meant to take any of these people seriously? And at what point do we acknowledge? Because listen, I don't want anyone to think here that this isn't a matter of shit on the right too. I just spend so much fucking time talking about, because it's built into the cake, right? It's like to have a conversation with people across the aisle, the immediate, what underpins any conversation like that is having to acknowledge the deficits on the right. So what I'm trying to do here is to point out the ways in which you've got one party that seems to be on the back foot, and they're gaining ground, which I think that's totally true. But I'm guessing some of this stuff was lined up anyways to build up momentum for votes. So it's going to come from that direction. In this case, it's coming from the left. Are we meant to think that they're actually going to try and put a national rent control in place or pass an amendment to accomplish something they couldn't even pass a bill for? How are we supposed to take these people serious?
Of course they're not going to try. It's just a political talking point. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, because it's basically impossible to pass a constitutional amendment. And in fact,
right, Ken, I agree with you, but look in the chat. People are arguing about, like, people lied in their interviews and 50 years of precedent and blah, blah, blah. Like, people believe this stuff, and I don't blame them because they trust their politicians.
That's different. It's actually different than what you can amend the Constitution. I mean, it really doesn't. Those are separate issues.
I hear you, but what I'm saying is people are actually motivated by the bullshit. And it's.
Well.
Do you not agree?
You have a U.S. Senator like Susan Collins saying that she got lied to. Well, of course, they'll believe it. And I think, it depends what people call a lie, I mean, this is where it is, right? So people have different views of what a lie is. Some people want to stick to this, like, really legalistic, definition, whether, you would be legal perjury. And then other people, like, look at it more substantively, like, well, you led me to believe. Think about all your personal relationships that you've had, with your spouse or whatever, what you've had, if you've ever had this happen, where, they may not have technically lied, but they substantively lied because they misled you. And that's the way people are looking at it.
But you can't ask someone if they're going to overturn something. Again, there's so many factors that come up with any case that comes before a court that, and someone James put it in the chat, you can try to get a tendency or an opinion about a particular ruling that happened, but not whether they're going to overturn it, because you just don't know what case which had standing at the time is going to come before you. It's the wrong question.
So I think it was Dr. Jordan. I think it was you that brought up the trust in the institution, and I hear you, but it's like a self-fulfilled prophecy, right? Like, people did actually trust the Supreme Court, and I think that there's been a loss in that trust for sure, because I don't think people understand why certain decisions are made. And it doesn't even mean that even if they totally understood, they would have to agree, because there are different ways in which people interpret the Constitution, which frankly is what comes down to what people call, the way in which the Supreme Court is politicized.
But I don't,
and that's fair. But okay.
Well, I mean, I don't think they. But I could be wrong. But I thought
I'm
that
just
the
curious.
reason.
Could you tell us what question you're answering before you answer?
Yes.
Is this one that you made up, or where is this question?
No, it's a response to what you said, which was you said something to the effect of it's probably true that they may not trust the court, and then you said something like they may not like the decisions, but I don't think that's where the trust issue came in.
Would you want me to ask the question then, if you want to answer my question?
Go ahead.
Okay, I mean, you're welcome to come up with a question. What I was gonna ask you is, like, if in fact it's something that, I think it's something that can be like basically willed into, what's the saying? There's a saying for this. You create a problem and then you make it come true just by